My name is Wendy LeBlanc. I'm currently an assistant director and learning specialist at Tulane University, and I'll let Meredith introduce herself.
Hi everyone, I'm Meredith Kral. I am the former tutor coordinator and writing specialist at Tulane, and as of 6 weeks ago, I am now the associate director of learning resources at Miami-Dade College.
Okay. So what we're going to focus on in this session is the reading groups and our process with them over the last 7 years we've worked together and how that they've transitioned. So what we want to do first before we get started is just to kind of get a feel of who's in the room with us. So, oops, hang on. My website just went away. Hang on, guys. All right, actually just put it in chat. Go ahead and let us know if you are a learning specialist, an advisor, a tutor coordinator, an administrator, GA, just so we kind of have a feel of who we're talking to.
I think the chat is disabled.
Daniel, can you check on that?
Yes, just give me a second.
Okay.
It should be working now, I think.
All right, so a lot of a learning specialist, writing, content tutoring, program coordinator, coach, coordinators. Great, so we have a little bit of a mix in here. The other thing I wanted to ask is how many of your schools have some type of common read experience? And you could just do a show of hands with the icon function on the bottom of the screen or on your toolbar. Okay, so there's a few, but it doesn't look like it's across the board. And then finally, how many of you have some type of program that you already do around a reading group? So same thing, you can just do the icons in the toolbar. Okay. So I don't see any yeses so far. So hopefully what you'll get out of this today is if you are interested in doing something like this, or if your school does have a reading program or a reading group, or if you're interested in starting one, you might be able to glean some ideas from it. So what I want to do is, we're going to skip this one, just kind of give you a little background of how this even came to be. I've been at Tulane for 8 years now. Meredith was there for 7 of them with me, and there's a lot of trial and error. So first we started with normal instruction where we had sometimes guest speakers, because you know they always get sick of hearing us talk, and we brought in some other people from campus to give lessons. We did our own lessons, and we realized it just wasn't working and students weren't clicking with it. So what we did one summer was we asked students, like, what do you want to do with this time? Like, we have to meet, how do you want to use it? And someone suggested reading a book together. So what we did was we asked them to throw out suggestions of books. We threw out some suggestions of books that we thought they would be interested in. And once we had that list compiled, we gathered kind of the book jacket synopsis of them and had the class vote on it. And the first book that they voted on was The Outsiders. So this was really our first attempt at this. And then we continually modify it every semester as we go. So our group has definitely changed over the years. When we first started, it was focused on really anyone that was in summer school, incoming freshmen that were in summer school that year. We've modified it since then to really focus on our incoming football freshmen. So it's typically a group between 15 and 20 students. We tend to target the students a little bit more that have tests between 18 and 25 in the ACT. Just for a point of comparison, Tulane's average admission ACT scores are in the upper 30s, or like, 30s or higher. The students in the groups have varying levels of reading fluency, just comfort reading in general, interest in reading, and different backgrounds. So not just racial, but also economic and geographical. So they're bringing a lot of different perspectives to our discussions. So one of the reasons we thought this was very important was a lot of the research talks about, and we really talked about this too in some of the earlier sessions, if anyone was in them, about how there's this assumption that students know what to do when they get assigned a reading or a book. And when they poll instructors, we find out that like a lot of students really don't have that skill set that they thought they did. So we wanted to help build up their confidence going into these classes. The other thing that we realized too is learning how to read and the comprehension that goes with it isn't really taught past the 3rd grade. So if students didn't have a really great foundation, and what we kind of stumbled on, especially in Tulane with our more local students, was the students that were impacted by Hurricane Katrina during that 3rd grade reading or 3rd grade year struggled a lot more because they didn't get a lot more of that teaching method after Katrina to kind of make up for that crazy year. And we mentioned this in an earlier session as well, but a lot of students read for the purpose of, what do I need to know out of this to be on a test or write a paper? And they don't really engage with it the way that we hope that they will. And really just trying to get students that campus may deem unprepared a little bit more comfortable talking about the content and engaging in course discussions. So what we did was we looked at the research that was out there, and there's a lot of research in the K-12 area on the concepts of literature circles. And what we did was took some of those ideas, but then adjusted them. And then some were based on our own experiences, and then some was just by the nature of our own restrictions based on campus and what we're working with. So typically in the K-12 system, they're very small, 5 to 8 students. We didn't do that. We didn't have the time necessarily to have a lot of the small groups. So we opened it up to everyone. So it's usually a 15 to 20 person group. But within that, we do break them into smaller groups for some mini discussions and activities. In the traditional group reading circles, students get to pick the book. You'll see in the next slide, we changed that. So in the first group we did, students did get to pick, and then after that we're using the books that campus selects for their reading project. Traditional literature circles require students to read outside of class. We're more realistic. We realize that our students are trying to get acclimated to campus. They're trying to get acclimated to their sport. They might be in other classes already. So we're not expecting them to read outside of class. Instead, we're going to read together during our sessions. In the traditional literature circles, there's very specific roles and handouts assigned to specific students for what their role is and what they're supposed to do when they're reading. We don't do that. So we use a lot of these concepts, but we'll interweave them throughout, or maybe when they do a small group activity, we'll tell them, someone's going to be the word wizard and pick out words that y'all want to discuss or learn more about or kind of stump you, or someone's going to summarize your discussion or this main theme of this chapter of the book. So we use it in different ways, but it's not an assigned role throughout the semester or sessions. So this allows students to get comfortable with the different roles and different ways of approaching literature. All right, so a little bit about the Tulane Reading Project. This is actually over 20 years, or about 20 years old. Every year, the university assigns a common read, and it's really focused for the incoming freshman class. But the guest speakers and kind of the theme of that book is incorporated through many different guest speakers and events that happen on campus throughout the year. So historically, the way the reading projects was set up, it was infused into the freshman seminar class. So the students read the book over the summer, and when they came to their freshman seminar class, there was one class period that talked about the book and they went to a speaker. A couple of years ago, they changed that, and now it's discussed at new student orientation. So we really wanted to make sure that our students were prepared to go in these really small groups in their first interactions with classmates on campus and faculty, being comfortable talking about the book and sharing their insight. And one, just having read the book or had some exposure to the book. So this was our focus as we switched it. So some basic logistics we have to consider. One is we obviously have to read the book prior. Due to the size of the book and the limited amount of time we have for these sessions, we have never read the full book, cover to cover, but we probably read about 90% of the book. So we'll figure out what passages maybe aren't as relevant or chapters don't really carry as much discussion content to it, and we'll skip over those. We also use audiobooks if possible. So giving them another perspective of reading out loud so they don't have to do it or we don't have to do it. We also incorporate a lot of multimedia. So these books have a lot of different relevant themes to them and current event issues. So we'll find other things online, whether it's news articles or videos or maps that really show them like this is the area that they're talking about, to help it be a little bit more relevant to them. Meredith and I do a lot of brainstorming, come up with these great calendars, and then definitely by day 2, usually by the end of day 1, we completely scrap it and are starting from scratch. Our biggest goal is figuring out like how are we going to get the students interested in this book and engaged in our sessions. Oh, and I did forget to mention with this too, the reading projects comes out of the dean's office on campus. So we've been working with them the last couple of years, and they have a discounted rate with the publisher. So we can get our book orders through that. Usually it's about like half price than if we were buying it directly off of Amazon for the students. I'm gonna skip this one for now. And I think this is Meredith.
Okay, so Wendy and I do various assessments with the students, and even on the first day during our first session, we always ask them to share with us 3 words that they think of when they think of reading. And so we made this lovely word cloud just to share their thoughts on reading. And as you can see, reading for them is not something that they enjoy. It's quite a challenge, and very few come in telling us they love to read. Very few of them have read a full book before. So we really try to focus on how, or as Wendy kind of alluded to in the previous slide, how are we going to engage them with this text? How are we going to get them to read a 365-page novel in a month? So that's where we go. So on that first day, when we walk in, or this past summer over Zoom, we immediately try to get them engaged, not only with us, but with one another. Because when we walk in, they're very quiet. Their body language shows that they're not very excited to be there, or they really don't understand why they're there. It's summer, they're football freshmen, they're there to play football. So this is one of our favorite icebreaker activities that we do with them. So they have to get up, they have to talk to one another, and they have to get someone in the room to sign off on one box, including Wendy and I. Everyone can sign just one. And so we usually have a winner who gets up and explains all the different boxes to the group, and it really does serve well. as an icebreaker, but it's also a nice lead into whatever book we might be reading. So that's step one. The next step is to introduce the book to them. And we use an activity to do that as well. And I'm gonna have you guys in the chat participate in this activity. So for example, this is what we did in one of our first sessions. We photocopied the first page of the book and we gave it to them. And this is what they had to work off of. So I'll read it out loud and then ask you some questions to respond to in the chat. And also, if you know what book this is, please keep that to yourself. So late one evening, toward the end of March, a teenager picked up a double-barreled shotgun, walked into the forest, put the gun to someone else's forehead, and pulled the trigger. This is the story of how we got there. So with that in mind, in the chat, if you could share any ideas of what you think is going on in this book, why that teenager might have picked up a gun and walked into the forest and put it on someone else's forehead and pulled the trigger. So any thoughts or ideas just in response to these couple sentences, if you could share them in the chat. Anyone?
May I just speak?
Sure.
Yeah.
My chat's not working.
Oh no, okay.
Okay, so I don't know this book, so you just want me to say why I think this teenager did this?
Yes, please.
He was very angry at someone, although it could have been a girl. Wait, does it say he? A teenager. Okay. So it could be a female, yes. Someone's very angry at someone to do that.
Okay. And in the chat, Allison said it could be about gang violence.
Gang violence, revenge, seeking revenge. Riverdale, that's a cool connection.
Self-harm.
Self-harm. These are great, thank you. So this is, again, first day. We haven't told you what book we're reading, and this is what we give you. And what we do is we write down all of their ideas on the whiteboard, or if we were meeting virtually, we would take a screenshot of the chat. And we let the students know that for every session that we meet, we're going to go back to their original ideas and trace them and see if they're right. Who got it from the start, who was completely wrong. And that excited them because now we're gonna have theories and we're gonna start a little challenge. So then after letting them know that, we reveal the book. So that excerpt was from Frederick Bachman's Beartown, which was a book we read as a group 3 years ago. And then for that book, in addition to those first lines, I think after we also gave them a photocopy of the back of the book as well, because their books hadn't come in yet. The other books we've done most recently are Vengeance by Zachary Lazar. And most recently this past summer, we read The Yellow House by Sarah Broom. So, again, the book, getting them hooked on the book was always our one of our main goals. And so with Vengeance, we did something similar. They knew what book it was. They had it in front of them, but we didn't really tell them what it was about. And we shared this page with them, but we revealed each sentence or statement separately. So they didn't see all 4 at once. And we asked them to write, draw, or list words in response to the statements above. And so a lot of them chose to draw when we did this, and came up with some interesting images for us to talk about. But this was a really good activity for us because what it showed us was that they were very literal in their thinking. They couldn't really identify the differences in these statements. So we knew for additional sentence sessions, we were going to have to work on developing their analytical abilities. And then we also came back to these 4 statements when we finished the book to see if they grew or deepened their understanding when it came to the book. And this book is about the social justice system in the state of Louisiana. So we had a lot to talk about. The other thing that we did with this book to get them hooked was we showed this. I don't think we showed the whole thing, but we showed a YouTube clip of the prison system of the Angola prison. And this video was both a curse and a blessing because they loved this video. We showed them other videos throughout our discussions, but they always, every session, can we watch the video? Can we watch the video? And what was really interesting for them to see as well as it shows the prisoners in Angola and how the warden was running things. But we did have STEM students in our group who had relatives and family members who were currently serving time in Angola or had previously served time. So it gave them some like a visual to go along with what we were reading and what they heard about. So that was the book hook for Vengeance. So those were our first activities that we did with them. So we'd always try to hook them with the book. And then we always, every session, we tried to make it as interactive as possible, just because our previous experience showed us that if we did not make it interactive and engaging, we were going to lose them. They were going to be bored. We were going to be bored. So we needed to make it interactive and fun for everyone. So we focused on 3-tiered engagement strategies. Just to help them make meaning with the texts in the moment and in different ways. So a lot of our strategies involved asking questions, listening to one another, being respectful and not judgmental, and encouraging them in their thoughts. Maybe they might have read something and completely misinterpreted it, but we were always positive and tried to turn maybe their misreading into an actual connection with the book. Investigating and finding out, I think that was one of our primary activities, which I'll get to in a minute, and then pose and solving problems for them with the book. So with the first 2 books, Beartown and Vengeance, we were able to turn them into detective games for the students. So with Beartown, y'all answered in the chat your different theories, and we track those theories every session, as I mentioned before. And Vengeance is also about a crime, and you don't know if the main character is guilty or not guilty. So we did a lot of sessions where we assigned them different characters and within their groups. They did close readings about those characters, and sometimes we went to court and we had them defend their characters. We said, your character is guilty. You need to find evidence in the text to prove that they are not guilty. And other groups will be trying to debate with you. And that was, again, a game that they loved and got really into, and they held on to those characters. So once they were assigned one, that was their person for the rest of the book. And they wanted that, they were kind of rooting for that character. Again, we watched videos. We had them act out scenes or their theories. There's always a group who loves to get up in front of everyone and pretend to be the characters. And we, of course, did some free writing and self-reflection as well. So all of our different activities, which we don't have time to get into each and every one outside of the book hooks, but we used a lot of different skills to help them build their reading development and analytical abilities. So we were doing a lot of close readings, finding evidence. They didn't know it, but they were writing theses. We kind of tricked them into it when we had them argue about a character's innocence or lack of innocence. And we did talk a lot about the real world. So especially with Beartown and Vengeance and the Yellow House, which we'll get into in a minute, there were a lot of real world connections for them. Beartown's about a group of student athletes who are on the hockey team in Sweden. And it's about a sexual assault without getting too deep into it. So we brought in some outside readings as well on student athletes and sexual assault with Vengeance, the social justice system in New Orleans and Louisiana. Wendy's going to get into the Yellow House in a minute, so I'm not going to get into that. But these activities gave them a deeper understanding of the plot and the characters, and we were able to practice different levels of reading. So I'll hand it over to Wendy. Wendy, you're muted.
So then COVID happened, and we had already ordered the books, had an initial plan, and then we were trying to figure out what are we going to do. We didn't know if students were going to be back on campus, if they were going to be in summer school, what type of availability we would have with them. We ultimately ended up doing it, but it was over Zoom, and it was a lot shorter of a session because of the time availability with football camp coming up. And the other difference that was a challenge was in the past, all of our sessions were always in the morning. So we still got them pretty fresh. This past summer, it was in the afternoon. So they've already been through practice and workouts and maybe another class. And then we're asking them to get on Zoom and read with us for an hour. So that was a little bit of a challenge. We also, as staff, had Zoom fatigue. Both Meredith and I worked with students on Zoom most of the day. So then by 3, 4 o'clock, we're trying to get on and facilitate this book group after our eyes are tired from looking at a computer screen all day. And at this point, Zoom was still fairly new to everyone, right? We didn't really use it at Tulane until COVID happened. Like, it existed, but only a few offices used it, and ours wasn't one of them. So we were still learning how to utilize Zoom. Students were learning how to utilize Zoom because a lot of them come from the Google platforms in their K-12 education. The other challenge, though, was because we had less time, we really had to figure out which elements of the book we wanted to focus on. And we really decided to focus on how it portrayed New Orleans and what it said about New Orleans, and how does that give them some insight going into their first year in New Orleans and at Tulane. We were lucky because we did have a few guys in our group that either lived their entire life in New Orleans or outside of New Orleans, or maybe lived here as children, then moved away. So then they were able to kind of share those perspectives of the difference in culture that they noticed, or why their parents moved, which had a lot to do with some of the themes that they talked about in the book. We definitely had some great benefits, though, to being on Zoom as well. It allowed us to expose them to different elements of New Orleans. There was a lot of also current event stuff that was going on that was tied into the book. So I was able to show pictures that I had actually taken of landmarks that she mentions in the book in class. We were able to pull up maps and show exactly like where they're talking about, where is it in relation to campus. We had more guest speakers. So one of our former coworkers in athletics was actually from New Orleans East, which is this part of New Orleans that the book really focuses on. So he hopped on Zoom one day and had an honest conversation with students and answered their questions about what he remembered about living and growing up in the East, and how it's changed when he goes back now, and what he noticed about the impacts of Hurricane Katrina. We also had an upperclassman student athlete that talked about his experiences of being a Black student athlete at a predominantly white institution. So it was a great opportunity for students to ask questions of people, kind of get some insight before they were really fully enmeshed in everything. We also had a couple of other staff that were interested, a graduate assistant and another staff member that was interested in being part of this group. So they helped us have facilitators in smaller breakout rooms and lead group discussions. All right, and as we mentioned, all these books have really important current issues and themes in them. So some of the different ones were sexual assault, gender and sexuality issues, criminal justice, class and race, social justice in general, especially how it ties to New Orleans, the educational system of New Orleans. So we kind of compared experiences of students here to maybe experiences in other places. Funny enough, we talked about hurricane prep and talked about it's something to take seriously, but we're like, you know, we really haven't had any direct hits lately. And then this is the summer where, you know, we're in the cone for everything this year. The other interesting thing that happened, and I couldn't find my picture on my computer, but one of the passages in the book she talks about is when she was younger and in school having to go like pay tribute to the John McDonough statue. And he has ties to like the Daughters of the Confederacy and, you know, that kind of stuff. So we were able to kind of have conversations and bring it into like, she's talking about these things in the book and it ties into what's happening in New Orleans right now. So that was really helpful as well. So we didn't have a lot of quantitative feedback because this is hard to measure, but we do get a lot of qualitative feedback from students. So what they really seem to take away from this is that we make reading fun. You know, they like that the way we present it, they want to kind of come back that next lesson and pick up the reading and figure out what happens next. We do have some students that skip ahead, and then when they come in, we're like, don't like ruin it for the rest of them. They do like the discussions we bring, especially for the books that are tied into the New Orleans area, so that they kind of have a little bit more of a perspective of how the city's laid out, what influences different things in the city. As Meredith said, a lot of times we ask them, one of the first surveys we give them is we ask like, how many books have you read, or when was the last time you completed a book? And some students don't. So, you know, one student said this was the first time I read a book start to finish. You know, I started and I saw how it ended. And then again, like we're very open, and there are some tough conversations, especially with some of these topics, and we're vulnerable and they become vulnerable in like what they're sharing. So we create this safe space where they feel comfortable sharing, asking questions, and really engaging with each other, and then figuring out like how that connects to their experiences or experiences of others, or just the town or the team that they're in.
So just to continue on with the feedback, these were their takeaways, what they said they learned from our group. So how to analyze a book, how to skim through and still get a good understanding. So a lot of when we talk about reading, not necessarily a novel, but academic texts and articles, what holds them back a lot is the length. And so they don't know basic skills. And so we work on that. Like we worked on learning how to skim or learning how to pinpoint important parts of reading, and there's just different strategies when you get with something and it looks really dense or scary to read, how to approach it, were some of their takeaways. And some of them still struggled, but what they also remembered it was if they were reading and they were struggling, they would come to me or Wendy because they remembered those are the reading ladies. So sometimes they would just pop in if they had a question about reading after the summer. So it helped us establish those relationships as well. And then Wendy talked about the challenges with our Zoom session for the Yellow House, but just some continuous challenges for us. Because the book changes every year, we don't have time or the opportunity to go back and work on the parts or the pieces that didn't work. And I think with Beartown, it would have been great if we could have done that again, because some of the guys came the next year to our first sessions when we told them we're doing it again, but we were doing a book called Vengeance, and they came and they did not like it because it wasn't Beartown. So that just creates some challenges as well. Wendy again alluded to the weather in New Orleans is a little crazy. So we've had to cancel sessions and then rearrange our whole calendar because of that. We don't have an assigned space where we could really do this. So we have to borrow other spaces in the department. And the space that we tended to utilize was not good for getting up and moving around. And a lot of our activities involve that. So we just kind of had to work around that. Our sessions back end was football camp. So if coach decided he needed to have a meeting that conflicted with our reading time got moved to another day or just got canceled. So then we'd always have to adjust for that. Students were also going through the testing and screening process at this time. So if they were scheduled to meet for that, they missed a session. And then just varying levels of reading ability and understanding. And we always had to figure out how to work around that. And then of course, global pandemics posed a challenge we were not expecting. So those are just some of the challenges that we experience when we do this. And then we always try to really focus on what worked and what didn't work. So for future sessions, we always wanted to incorporate new strategies and revisit just different ideas that we researched or heard about. And so these were just some of the ideas that we wanted to do in our next group, which were individual summaries for them to share with a small group and to compare. Choosing how they want to respond when we ask a question. So whether it be they choose a quote that stood out or they want to go in deep with a character or how it relates to something in their life and giving character advice. So giving them more choices when it came to responding so that there wasn't only one way for them to respond. And then tracking vocab words, that was something we did pretty frequently, was as they read, whether it was reading out loud or read silently, highlighting the words that they didn't understand. We would keep track of those as well when they were reading out loud and they stumbled over a word. And so just working vocab more into that. Our intention in doing this was to build a community of learners, and the outcome always varied by each and every student depending on how much they bought into the book and into our group. But our goal was to have them come to know each other and us and value what each has to offer. Solving problems together as a group and they're learning different ways to solve a problem as well, sharing responsibility and control, and really learning through their action, reflection, and demonstrating their ideas. But we also wanted to establish an atmosphere that's predictable and yet full of real choices. Our atmosphere was predictable and we knew what book we were reading every day, but they never knew what we were doing. We didn't give them a syllabus because sometimes, like Wendy said, we threw our calendar away the second day, and based on the kind of reactions and responses we were getting, we just adjusted each and every lesson. So we'd walk in and they'd be like, they had no clue what was coming for them, and that kept them on their toes as well. So they weren't really sure what they were going to experience from the day-to-day.
Okay. And then and I tell the students this too, like I'm a big nerd. I love reading. I love engaging with others in books. And I'm actually part of a book club that campus does through the Center for Engaged Learning and Teaching. So The Missing Course was one of the books that was done, I think right before the pandemic. But this quote really stood out to me. No matter what subject we're teaching, our students are always the real subjects, the human beings who are tasked with helping. And this is really the mindset that we take going into this. You know, we know the goals to get them through this book, but really we're there to help the students that are in that room with us. So what do they need? How do we need to keep adjusting what we're doing so that they're getting the most out of this experience, so that they can use those skills moving forward, so that they know the connections on campus or in our office to go to when they have help. And I think it's worked because they are more comfortable coming to us and asking for help with citations or finding library sources, or just like, this reading's ridiculous. Like, where do I start? So just kind of keep that in mind too, whenever you're building out programming, like, how are you best supporting the students? So now we'll have time. If anyone has any thoughts or questions, y'all can either unmute yourself or put them in chats.
Any questions?
Is this part of a class that you guys teach, or is this just something that you wanted to help like build skills with the students? Like, do they actually get course credit for it?
Yeah, so there's no course credit attached to that. Yeah, that's something we've advocated for, and it's not something, just because Tulane doesn't offer remedial classes, and this would be seen as like a remedial type course. But I think we don't ask that much of time of them, and we also don't ask them to do anything outside of our sessions. And I think that's the big piece. I think if we were asking them to read on their own, they wouldn't be coming in prepared. So we're making sure. Go ahead, Meredith.
Oh no, I was going to say, when we first tried it out 7 years ago with the outsiders, we did ask them to read outside of our group. And the goal at the end was to show them the movie, because they had heard about the book, they heard about the movie, they wanted to see it, none of them had. So we kept kind of, reminding them, if you want to see the movie, you have to read outside of our group. None of them did it. So yeah.
And then Allison asked, do you have suggestions for doing this when there's no assigned reading or book through campus? I would look at popular books, just kind of see what's out there that ties into things that are either relevant for your campus or your community, or you just think students would be interested in. We had success with the outsiders. We asked them to bring in a list. So we had a couple of days where they were just giving us ideas and then we voted on it. So it was really the student's choice. Like, we didn't rule out any of the options that they brought forward. So I think giving the students more of a voice is going to give them more ownership in the process as well.
Yeah, and that worked well with the outsiders, letting them choose, because if they ever, they didn't really complain about it either. This was a book, I don't know why they heard of it or what sparked that, but because they chose it, they bought in very easily because it was their book. So. Any other questions?
It was a great presentation.
Thanks, Joy.
Thank you.
Well, we'll hang out for a bit. If anyone has any other questions, just let us know, and our contact information's on the screen as well.
Thank you all.
Daniel, I think we could probably end the recording.
Okay.
Should we jump off?